Getting the Cincinnati Bengals to 0-2 has not been easy, but the New England Patriots and the Kansas City Chiefs both did something that I expect the Washington Commanders to try to replicate in week 3. That and more coming up on this episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to this episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. You can also find me writing about the Commanders for WUSA9.com for this season. And I'm here with you every single Monday through Friday. Thanks for coming through for today's episode. And to all of our everydayers out there, special thank you to you for coming through every single day. Locked On Commanders is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's episode, in which we're going to talk about the first injury report of the week, what it might mean for the weekend to come in Monday Night Football, Jaden Daniels versus the Cincinnati Bengals defense. And we're also going to talk about a little bit more Bengals-centric film review. We had an extra episode this week called a Bonus Friday episode. Typically today, we're breaking down our keys to the game. We're making predictions, doing all that stuff. Instead, that's going to actually come out Sunday night. So you can come back and check that out. So what I did is I split our film review episode into 2 episodes. Typically, that film review episode is going to be our turn the page. We're going to do a film review of the game that was, look ahead to the game that's coming. But this week, we did a full episode on the game that was, and then we're doing a full episode on the next opponent. So that's how we're breaking down today. If you want to get even more out of the Locked On Commanders podcast, all you got to do is become an insider. And to do that, all you got to do is go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. You get the first 2 weeks for free. You can text me. You can ask me your questions. I'll be texting you. Sometimes I ask you guys your questions and help you influence the show, but you also get bonus content, inside information, and a lot of communication from me. So again, joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to try that out for free. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the code, all lowercase, Locked On NFL, to win $50 instantly whenever you play $5. So the Washington Commanders are going to try to become the 3rd straight team this season, so 3 for 3 to start the season, to allow Ja'Marr Chase to have a good amount of yards, probably a good amount of catches, but not dictate the game and not become a stealer of the game, similar to what they did against Malik Neighbors and the New York Giants. So the Cincinnati Bengals come into this game 0-2, and Ja'Marr Chase has certainly had his fingerprints on the first 2 games of the year, but what he hasn't been able to do is take over a game the way that we've seen in some instances before. So it's not realistic to say that Ja'Marr Chase is just going to have a bad year and this is going to be his season where he's just going to have a good amount of yards, but not a great amount of yards, not a great amount of touchdown production, if any touchdown production, and he's going to be an essential non-factor in the outcome of the game. So eventually the Bengals are going to have what we in the industry and fan bases like to call a get-right game. And as we know, the Washington Commanders have been that get-right game for some people in the past. So how do the Washington Commanders prevent themselves from becoming that get-right game? Well, I think to a certain extent, they have to look at what the Chiefs did, look at what the Patriots did a little bit, and kind of take that and say, you know what, this fits our mentality as a defense, so we need to do some of the same things. So in week 2, Ja'Marr Chase had 4 catches, 35 yards, no touchdowns. Again, part of the game, not an impactful part of the game, right? And some of his frustration started boiling up to the surface. And as we know, a lot of times when star receivers start getting mad on the field, doesn't really signal good things for the team. In that week 2 matchup, Trent McDuffie was largely responsible for containing Ja'Marr Chase. Looking back at Chase's most recent matchup against the Chiefs, it was a 26-25 loss to the Chiefs for the Bengals. And again, with the 4 catches, Ja'Marr Chase was covered by Trent McDuffie, according to Zebra Sports, who does all the next-gen tracking for the NFL. 17 of his 38 routes run. That's 45% of Ja'Marr Chase's routes run. He was covered by 1 guy. That includes 4 coverages in press coverage. In those reps, McDuffie allowed just 1 catch for 4 yards on 2 targets. 1 target was in the end zone. It was broken up by McDuffie. Now, additional data says that Ja'Marr Chase lined up nearly evenly between the left and the right sides of the formation, and he even had some reps in the backfield. So expect to see that from the Bengals in week 3 as well. And if there's one cornerback that's on this team that I look at and say, okay, who could be this team's McDuffie? Who could be the guy that covers Ja'Marr Chase for the majority of the time? it's got to be Benjamin St-Juste. We're not going to like completely flip the script on this thing, and one really good game for Benjamin St-Juste doesn't kind of erase everything else. But when you talk about who the best cover corner on this team is, it's clearly Benjamin St-Juste. He's a little bit taller, a little bit heavier than McDuffie, so he can be a little bit more of a physical presence if he plays that right. So you have that advantage to him as well. Now, Jamar Chase, obviously a speed demon, right? So just like the Chiefs did, just like the Patriots did, don't leave Benjamin St-Juste on an island all the time. Don't even leave Benjamin St-Juste on an island with Jamar Chase most of the time because that's how you're going to get burned. Now, St-Juste largely lines up on the defense's left side, which is the offense's right side. But in week 2, McDuffie basically, I don't want to say followed Chase because he didn't really specifically follow Jamar Chase, but he was certainly all around the formation. So usually Washington doesn't ask St-Juste to do that. So that's where things are going to be a little bit different between what the Chiefs did and what the Commanders might do. But if they do want to have somebody travel with or around Jamar Chase, again, St-Juste would be the guy. So far, St-Juste has spent 77% of the time on the one side of the formation. So clearly, the Commanders not looking to move him around as much. So asking him to do so would be asking him to do something out of his comfort zone. On the other side, you also have I anticipate Noah Igbenogany starting this week. He didn't start last week against the Giants, but came in for Michael Davis partway through the game, and I think the Commanders were a little bit happier with what they got out of Igbenogany versus Michael Davis. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Igbenogany get the start this week. And then, of course, is assuming that Emmanuel Forbes is not going to be able to go for Monday Night Football, just 1 week removed from thumb surgery. The first time Cincinnati targeted Jamar Chase was that end zone target that I just kind of mentioned. They came out stacked in a reduced split with with running back Chase Brown of the Chiefs matched with 2 defenders. So they had Chase Brown and Jamar Chase stacked, reduced on the left side. The Bengals matched them with 2 defenders, one of them being McDuffie and the other one being safety Justin Reed, which in the Commanders scenario would be, I think Justin Reed is more of a Jeremy Chin type. I don't know the Chiefs defense as well as I know the Commanders, but I think that's probably more of a Chin matchup. When Brown motioned back into the backfield pre-snap, Reed followed in a way that would indicate zone coverage, so he wasn't like a man coverage movement. It was more of a zone coverage movement. And at the snap, the Chiefs did indeed drop into cover 3, but they matched, right? So we talked about match zone before. They matched. So when Jamar Chase came into his break, instead of just dropping into a straight zone in cover 3 like you would see on, say, Madden and leaving the slant wide the heck open, McDuffie matched with Jamar Chase. Nobody else was threatening his zone, so he went with him as well and was able to stay on his hip on the left to right side breaking slant route and was able to break up the pass. Now, you could argue that if Joe Burrow puts the ball more ahead of Jamar Chase than on the body of Jamar Chase, then maybe that thing is caught. But at the end of the day, you're defending the pass that you get, not the pass that you could have got. And it turns out to be a PBU. It was a very physical play. McDuffie was definitely in contact with Chase the entire way through the route, but not so much so that you look at the rep and say, man, I'm surprised they didn't throw a flag, right? Good, competitive, physical football. And he went out there and made the play. So that's the kind of stuff that kind of matches the Joe Witt Jr. mentality, right? Like when Joe Witt Jr. and Dan Quinn see that play on tape, that's the exact type of ball they want to see their defenders playing, especially in the red zone, especially in the goal to go type of scenario. So that is what you expect the Washington Commanders to try to come out here and replicate. Now, we know that guys like Benjamin St-Juste haven't always been the most physical corners on the field, right? Noah Igbenogany certainly has kind of a reputation for being a little bit grabby, if we're being honest. And he drew a defensive pass interference flag last week because of that. But like Dan Quinn said in his presser following the Giants game, he can accept the penalties for holding for DPI every once in a while because it means you're competing. And sometimes that just kind of happens when you're out there competing. It's the pre-snap and the post-snap penalties that you can't go up against. Now, Jamar Chase brought in 4 catches on total 5 targets. So most of the time he's targeted, he's getting his catches. His biggest gain came for a gain of 13 yards. So that's great. You're keeping one of the most explosive receivers on the field from getting explosive play against you. All 4 of his catches came against soft or off or zone coverage. The lone incompletion again came in that one. It was zone coverage, but it was an aggressive match zone coverage. So that's not to say that I'm not saying that the answer here is for the Washington Commanders to press Jamar Chase all game long, because eventually he's going to win. He's going to beat you. What I'm saying is the key that we see in the Patriots and the Chiefs tapes is that they pick and choose, and they picked and chose the right moments to be aggressive against Jamar Chase, and then the right moments to say, okay, we're going to give you a little bit of space so you can't beat us over the top, but we're going to rally and we're going to tackle. And that's obviously the important part of this whole thing, right? Is you have to rally and tackle, which is why one of the reasons I expect Noah Igbenogany to get the start over Michael Davis. So, if you turn on those tapes, like 2nd and 12, they're giving Jamar a little bit of cushion. They let him catch the 4-yarder. Maybe he turns into a 6-yarder. They rally, they make the tackle. When it's 3rd and 3, when it's 3rd and 4, when it's 3rd and 5, they're bumping him at the line. They're carrying him downfield physically. They're bracketing him. They're putting coverage all around him. They're putting 3 dudes around him sometimes. That's when they really go out there and say, we're smothering Jamar Chase, and you're going to have to beat us with someone else. So that's what I expect the Washington Commanders to try to do. Because again, taking away star players, not necessarily a new tactic. With Tee Higgins on the mend, it's been a little bit easier for the Patriots and for the Chiefs to do that in the first 2 weeks. We'll see what Tee Higgins' status is coming into week 2. He was limited in practice on Thursday, so we'll see how that goes through the weekend. And when we come back for our next episode, we'll have the full practice report, injury report, game status report to talk to as well. But even if Tee Higgins can't go, the Cincinnati Bengals do have some other weapons that they've been targeting more because of the absence of the wide receiver. We'll get into that more coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're going to do that today thanks to our friends over at FanDuel. And you've been hearing us talk a lot about FanDuel over the last couple of years because FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we've got a little something different for you that's been going on this month. And as of today, as of the day we're recording this episode and it's going to drop, you have got 2 days left to take advantage of every FanDuel customer getting a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV when you bet $5. All you got to do is bet $5. You get that 3-week free trial. Then, as long as you have a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. Washington Commanders are 7.5-point underdogs this weekend against the 0-2 Cincinnati Bengals. The over-under total score is 46.5 points. So if you want to take any of those or any other line, again, $5, as long as you do it before September 22nd, gets you 3 weeks of NFL Sunday Ticket. So go to FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. While the Cincinnati Bengals have had some struggles getting Jamar Chase to be a dominant part of their offense in the early going, some of that certainly be tied to the absence of Tee Higgins, who is trying to work his way back on the field Monday night against the Washington Commanders. But if he can't get there, there are some other weapons the Cincinnati Bengals have started to find, and they started to find them more specifically in week 2, which will lead into some of the things they try to do in week 3. Thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. Every day, thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. And one of those weapons, in fact, the main weapon they're using outside of Jamar Chase in replacement of Tee Higgins, or not really replacement, but in lieu of Tee Higgins, right, has been tight end Mike Gesicki. And Mike Gesicki is interesting because if we go back 2 off seasons ago, Mike Gesicki was actually a tight end that I wanted the Washington Commanders to go out there and target. Receiving tight end, not really known for his blocking, but known for his ability to kind of get out there as a pass receiver and do all those things. And with Eric Bieniemy coming in as the offensive coordinator at the time, I thought, okay, this is going to be a team that relies less on their tight ends as blockers, more as receivers. Mike Gesicki kind of fills that role. Washington didn't go after him, as far as I know, but he ends up with the New England Patriots for that season, and now he's with the Cincinnati Bengals. So all of it being what it is, Mike Gesicki leads the Cincinnati Bengals in targets with 13 of them. If you told me preseason that the Cincinnati Bengals have Jamar Chase, they got Tee Higgins, they got Chase Brown, they got Zach Moss, they got all these guys, and it's going to be Mike Gesicki leading the team in targets, I would not have taken that bet if I was quite honest with you. But that's where we are today. And of course, again, the absence of Tee Higgins certainly impacting that, right? With those 13 targets, Mike Gesicki has 7 catches, 91 yards versus the Chiefs, or with the 13 targets overall. In the Chiefs game, he had 7 catches, 91 yards total week 2. So definitely an impact player in that game. Part of the reason the Bengals were almost able to pull off that upset. Joe Burrow was asked about the increased usage of his tight ends and the increased usage specifically of 12 personnel, 1 running back, 2 tight ends earlier this week. And he said, quote, a lot of teams have different looks in 12 personnel that they do in 11, and week to week that could vary. The usage of 12 could vary week to week, depending on matchups and what we feel like the defense is going to give us in those situations. We have the guys to make that decision this year. We have a lot of tight ends that we feel really good about putting them on the field and going and making plays. So that's a luxury that we have this year, end quote. And it's something that they've certainly used, and it's something that you could certainly see them use against the Washington Commanders, those 12 personnel packages, because when you look at what the Commanders like to do, they like to be aggressive. They like to bring guys like Frankie Louvu off of blitzes and everything else. Bobby Wagner, for the most part, basically stays in kind of his middle area, tries to fill the run gaps, maybe drops into some zone coverages, things like that. And then on the other side, whether it's Fowler, whether it's Jamin Davis if he's active, whether it's whoever's on the other side. They like to bring those guys too. Well, quarterbacks against blitzes, you start off getting taught throw where the blitz is coming, right? Throw where they ain't. So if a blitz is coming here, throw there because there's not usually a guy there. Now, of course, defenses get creative. They replace that guy, all that stuff, try to bait you into an interception and all those things. And certainly NFL quarterbacks have to be a little bit more aware about that kind of stuff than usual. But the bottom line is the more the middle of the field players, so your box safeties, your linebackers, all those things are coming in as rushers, the more open space you're going to have in the middle of the field. So while the Cincinnati Bengals are finding some aggressive defenses facing in the first 2 weeks of the season, it makes sense that they're getting their tight ends involved, and they're going to continue to try to get their tight ends involved moving forward. Another tight end that they've been getting involved, at least for the Chiefs, the game against the Chiefs, Eric All had 4 catches, 32 yards, which doesn't sound amazing, but honestly, it's pretty much the same stat line that Jamar Chase had. So Eric All getting Jamar Chase type production against Kansas City Chiefs. Now the Commanders have only faced 10 pass attempts out of 12 personnel this season. And they're pretty good against them so far this season, allowing just a 40% completion rate. And the eighth lowest yards per attempt out of 12 personnel. So that's pretty good production against 12 personnel. Right now, the Giants, week 2, going back, just lay a little bit of context here. The New York Giants have thrown out of 12 personnel, the second most in the league this year. But they only tried 8 times against the Washington Commanders out of their total 18 times. So the Giants threw out of 12 personnel 10 times week 1, 8 times in week 2. So they're actually regressing in how often they use 12 personnel. So they actually used it less. Now, the Bengals, however, are 4th most in the NFL in passing attempts out of 12 personnel, but they went from 7 attempts in week 1 to 11 attempts in week 2. So this is a team that's actually on the rise in trying to use the passing game out of 12 personnel. Now, some of that is certainly going to be based off of, okay, we're not working trying to just get Jamar Chase free. We're not working just trying to get our other receivers free. So how do we create some offense here? And one of those ways is by getting into 12 personnel and throwing the ball. Now they also have to look at how do they match against the defense, right? So how do they match against what the Washington Commanders are doing? And again, like I said, you get in 12 personnel, you get Mike Gesicki out there, he chips Frankie Luvu, who's coming in on a blitz, gets out in the open space that Frankie Luvu was just in. To me, it makes sense that the Cincinnati Bengals are probably going to try to throw out a 12 personnel 11 times or maybe even more. So all the targets, of course, aren't going to tight ends, right? They're leading, right? Mike Gesicki's leading the team in targets, but they're not all going to tight ends. So what are the Cincinnati Bengals trying to do to get their guys open? Well, there are a lot of dagger concepts, a lot of drive concepts that are very effective in driving defenders out of an area they plan to bring a receiver in behind them, right? It's very common. Most route trees, most route combinations have this type of thing in them where you run a guy out, so you clear those defenders out, and then you bring a guy into the empty space behind him. But the Bengals like to use a lot of dagger, a lot of drive formations or pass concepts rather to do that. It invites pressure because it does take a little bit of time to develop because now you're using one route to facilitate a second route, right? So timing is important, which makes being physical at the snap even more important. You want to drive off that timing from the receivers, force Joe Burrow to hold the ball a tick later. But then again, your pass rush getting home is even more effective because while Joe is waiting for that one route to clear, the second route to come in, if your pass rush can get home against a less than super mobile quarterback in Joe Burrow, then you can have some wins there. Challenges size matchups with dual tight ends, sometimes inline or attached, but also they can use those tight ends as split receivers. And here's what you're not going to like to see. The Cincinnati Bengals will use their tight ends in a trips bunch look, which creates size and communication challenges for the Washington Commanders. And so far, through 2 weeks, they have had fits against that trips bunch look. They had not figured it out yet. They got burned by it quite often against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The New York Giants used it against them successfully. So now you're talking about a Bengals offense that is not only going to use that trips bunch look, but they're also going to use it with tight ends. So now you've got Mike Sanders still, maybe Benjamin St-Juste, Bobby Wagner, Jeremy Chinn out there, but you're also doing it not just from the communication standpoint. Now you're also dealing with a size matchup as well. Also keep a lookout for wide receiver Andre Yosivas, 6'3", 205-pound receiver, kind of coming out of nowhere a little bit, couple of touchdown catches. Looking at the Bengals defensive side, I know we focus a lot about the offense, but we know the Commanders defense is kind of the most suspect part right now, which is surprising considering you have a rookie quarterback. But the Bengals present the most stacked boxes of any defense in the NFL, so expect Brian Robinson to meet a little bit more competition this weekend when he's trying to run the ball. 83% of the time, the Bengals have used 4-man rushes and only a 10% blitz rate. So Jaden Daniels not going to have to deal with a lot of blitzes. The Giants did up their own blitz rate, but again, when you're upping from a 10% blitz rate, if you move that up to 16, 18%, you're still not going to see a whole lot of blitzing. Week 1 versus the Patriots, the Bengals had middle of the field closed looks more often, which means they're being more aggressive, less underneath stuff, forces the quarterbacks to try to find the ball or find deeper targets and hold the ball longer. Week 2 versus the Chiefs, the Bengals went more middle of the field open, which is more conservative, limits downfield plays, opens up the underneath stuff and running lanes. So it's going to be an interesting gauge to see what the Bengals do against Jaden Daniels and the Commanders, because it's almost like the Bengals are going to declare what they're more threatened by. If they're more threatened by him as a passer, they go middle of the field close, more single high coverage, stuff like that. If they're more threatened by him as a runner, maybe they go middle of the field open, contain everything, and have the guys to rally on him when he's running the ball. So you're going to be able to find out what the Bengals think of Jaden and this offense based on their middle of the field looks when they get into the game on Monday night. Going to be very interesting to watch that. Who is going to be on the field Monday night? We don't know for sure. We got our first sign on Thursday with our post-practice injury reports. We'll talk about that and dive into a little bit of projection about who might play, who might not play. Coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're doing that today thanks to our friends over at Prize Picks. And Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million users, including this guy. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. And unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you got to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. And every weekend in September, so including this weekend, you get an automatic win anytime Caleb Williams throws 1 yard or more in a game. So right now, 1 yard passing by Caleb Williams gets you an automatic win every football weekend in September. That's 4 free weeks of wins. If you've been taking advantage of it like I have, you've only got a little bit of time left. So don't miss that deal, because when September ends, that deal is gone. And you can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. It's a really fun app to make part of your NFL routine. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even have to win to receive the bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, looking at the first injury report of the week. We're dropping this here Friday morning, and on Thursday afternoon, we had our first practice report from both teams. 3 players not participating in practice for the Commanders, 3 players not participating in practice for the Bengals. For the Commanders, it was Clelin Ferrell with a knee injury, Emmanuel Forbes with that thumb injury, and Jerzon Newton with a foot/rest. So Clelin Ferrell here has been dealing with knee since training camp, right? Now, how much is it bothering him now and all that stuff? That's hard to gauge and all those things, but it's something that he has been dealing with. So from that aspect, I don't view it as a serious threat, to his potential to play, especially having that extra day to give it a little bit more rest, a little bit more treatment. So you expect to see Clelin Ferrell out there. Emmanuel Forbes, that thumb procedure again. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a UCL expert or anything like that, but I don't expect guys to play once they have surgery. I know he's on IR, right? So it's not going to be a 4-week absence. But once a guy has a surgical procedure on anything, I'm looking at that as kind of like a 2-week minimum type of situation. So maybe next week against the Arizona Cardinals, Emmanuel Forbes is able to return. That's my expectation. That's not a fact, right? So we'll keep monitoring it through the weekend. Jerzon Newton not participating again. Dan Quinn on Thursday said he wants to see Johnny Newton get more and more reps. Got a few reps on Sunday against the New York Giants. That was kind of by design. And then he didn't practice on Thursday. Again, that was by design. If they go back to last week 2's prep, what they did is they had Johnny Newton sit out the first practice of the week. He participated in the padded practice and then was a lesser participant in the final practice. Basically get him some reps, but don't stress him out too much and then let him come out for the game. I think that's probably what they're going to follow through the rest of the week. Dorrance Armstrong limited with a chest injury. Zach Ertz, vet day off on Thursday. Quan Martin with that hamstring that popped up at the end of last week. He was able to play with it. Didn't seem to have any issues. Didn't seem to miss any time. So he'll probably be okay. And then Brandon Coleman, full participant, but now it's an ankle, right? So now no longer is he on the injury report for his shoulder, but now it's an ankle. And I don't know if you caught it on the broadcast, but he actually rolled his ankle at one point, came over to the sideline in a good amount of pain. But fortunately, he's able to practice on it. So it looks like he'll be okay. Still, any type of affliction with Brandon Coleman, as we've seen, kind of leans towards maybe Cornelius Lucas getting the start against the Bengals. We'll have to see how the week progresses. For the Cincinnati Bengals, 2 defensive linemen not practicing. And that really is kind of the big story for the Bengals defenses. they haven't been generating a lot of pressure. Now they've got two of their starting defensive linemen on the men. BJ Hill with a hamstring, Sheldon Rankins also with a hamstring. James Rapine of Locked On Bengals told us he doesn't expect either of those guys to play. Tanner Hudson with a knee injury. The tight end, he's the one that if you watch the highlights from the Bengals Patriots game, he's the one that had the ball punched out as he was trying to enter the end zone against the Pats. That helped cost them that game. He's got a knee injury and also not participating. Safety Von Bell was limited for the Bengals. Tight end Mike Gesicki was limited. Defensive lineman Chris Jenkins was eliminated. And offensive tackle Marius Mims with a pec was also limited. Again, all of those guys will have to keep monitoring throughout the week. Typically limited in the first practice means you'll probably be okay. Quarterback Joe Burrow, full participant with that wrist injury. A lot of people have been talking about him flexing his wrist on the sideline. I wouldn't worry too much about that. You're probably going to see Joe Burrow on Monday night. You're going to see me next Sunday night as we come back for our final preview episode of Washington Commanders versus Cincinnati Bengals Monday Night Football, and then we will get back together Monday following the game on the field there. At least that's the plan. Never been to Cincinnati's field, so I don't know what their policies are, all that stuff. But if we can, we'll get on the field to do our live. Either way, we'll do a live episode somewhere in that stadium on Monday nights / Tuesday morning, maybe, depending on how long the game is. On that next episode of Locked On Commanders, you'll get my predictions, final practice reports, and all that stuff. We'll get ready for that. So in the meantime, if you've got questions or comments, all you got to do is send them to me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders today. Become an insider and let me know what you think. And for your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast in the morning. The Madman Tyler Rowland gets you kicked off with a double shot of NFL espresso. Then in the afternoon, we hit the barbershop with Tony Wiggins and some real NFL talk. It's the all-new Locked On NFL, and it's twice per day. As always, thank you so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. And until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I will see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.